Well, the church would be very, very supportive. Contrary to what some people believe, the church is not anti-science, not in the least. Matter of fact, most of the progress that's been made over the years in a lot of areas, even from astrophysics to medicine, have been through the encouragement and direct involvement of the church. So no, not in the least. I want to make sure that that's clarified. And I also want to be sure that people don't, with my earlier comments, assume that, well, Tom would be anti-medicine of sorts or anti-curative medicine, considering his work in hospice. Again, not in the least. Just to give you a personal illustration, I mentioned in my introduction, I was born and raised on a farm. I'm number 8 out of 10 children, so a large family. We were all born at home. Aunts from the neighboring farms would come over and assist each other in childbirth. But being the number 8, I always knew about child number 5 was born a very healthy boy, but didn't seem to be able to flourish at all. Matter of fact, anytime he would eat, it would be projectile vomiting. So he died about 2 weeks or so after birth. So I always thought that he died of pneumonia. And at Mom's funeral, I was telling my oldest brother, who was really more a father to me, that Mom had a tough life, you know, losing just a child that was born healthy, but yet got pneumonia, which is easily treatable today. And he said, what the heck are you talking about? Lucas is his name. He said he didn't die of pneumonia. He died of starvation. And geez, it just kind of took me aback. So where did I get this point that he may have died of pneumonia? Mom breastfed us all, and I think with the projectile vomiting, she maybe thought something was wrong with her milk. And that's what would cause Lucas to have that vomiting and not get any nourishment. Well, it's easily diagnosed today. It's either duodenal atresia or pyloric stenosis. Very easily treatable, valve to the stomach or valve to the small intestine. So if it had been Lucas born with modern medicine, as I call it, I'd have another brother. Another one I could have fought with when I grew up, you know. But more seriously, you know, enriched by another person. So we need to be very careful about not seeing medicine, you know, today when it seems to be unable to know when enough is enough. That has done an immense amount. Even when you consider if a female child born in 1900 could expect to live to what age? Generally, we say 48. A female child born 2020 can expect to live probably to 84. So what I did, the program I listened to, they just slipped the 48 to the 84, which is very likely in terms of the advances that continue to be made in medicine. But it still begs the question of, there comes a point when you have to say enough is enough. And that's the difficult part for us today. The painful wrestling that has to go on in determining the right thing to do in terms of ceasing the curative intervention and going to the comfort, the palliative intervention. Sick to the dying rule, as I said earlier. So the church, as I said, is not anti-science, anti-medicine, but also has what I call the 2 pillars in terms of how we look at life. And the very important part in the religious language, sanctity of life, we would in the secular language call that inviolability of life. But in the church teaching, our theology says clearly that we are gifted with life by God. We don't have it of our own making. So we have a responsibility to be good stewards of that gift of life. So this is life that is inviolable, it is dignified, and it must be given that sanctity. So we don't want to assume that we have absolute control over that. So that would be where we start from, the sanctity of life. And the bishops are very clear in the ethical religious directives. Before we go there, maybe the other part that the pillar is to talk about. So this is the sanctity of life. What's the purpose of life? Why are we here? So in the Baltimore Catechism, you're way too young to remember that aspect, but I'm old enough where I had to memorize the question-answer format. So one of the very first questions is, who created us? Well, God created us. And the second question, why did God create us? And you want to give the answer too, since you came up with the question? God created us to know, love, and serve each other and God in this world. But once our bodies get so compromised we can't do it here anymore, what do we need to do? Take the next step and know, love, and serve fully and completely in the next world. So this is already the church teaching. The sanctity of life has to be balanced with the purpose of life, that life, physical life, doesn't have absolute value. There comes a point when you have to say, this physical existence is worn out, it's too compromised. Now I go to the deeper levels of what now defines me, the ability to know, love, and serve. As I was starting to say that, one of the teachings of the church, Catholic bishops, is what I almost call the Bible of my work as a medical ethicist, the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services. So in the Baltimore Catechism, we've got the two questions answered very basically, or asked and answered very basically. Who created us? God. Why did we get created? To know, love, and serve. Here's what the bishops say. In terms of sanctity of life, starting off in this paragraph, issues in care for the dying, the truth is that life is a precious gift from God. Sanctity of life. And then it goes on. We are not the owners of our life. We have a duty to preserve it. But what's the reason for this gift? And then the bishops say, it is to give honor and glory to God, know, love, and serve, what I said earlier. And then they come here, and I'll paraphrase this part here, because the bishops talk about the duty to preserve life is not absolute. I would prefer this language, the duty to preserve our physical existence is not absolute. Because life is always precious. Life is always good, it's always beautiful, and life, in the deeper definition, never wears out. What wears out? Our bodies. So we have a duty to preserve this preciousness of life to the very last breath. So what they say then, paraphrasing, the duty to preserve physical existence is not absolute. And since it's not absolute, we don't have to do absolutely everything to keep a body around. That sooner or later, death becomes the friend and death becomes the healer. But here it goes back again to the difficult, painful wrestling of when is enough enough. We'll get into that a little bit later, I think, in our discussion here in terms of this is where medical ethics comes in. And I'll preface that a little bit by saying what we now would consider almost a secular field, medical ethics, was really the domain of the church, the theologians in the church. I remember way back in the seminary studying Ford and Kelly. You know, just a really good primer on medical ethics. Again, kind of the cooperation of the church with science here. And then you can go on up the line in terms of other ethicists that have been around. Jesuits, John Perez, McCormick, a Dominican that I worked with, Kevin O'Rourke, just a tremendous ethicist and tremendous gentleman. And even when it comes to the classic court cases about determining when enough is enough, lots of those court cases called in Catholic moral theologians, Catholic ethicists to be their experts in terms of determining those very, very difficult, painful questions. Absolutely.